Hi, here we are. I thought I missed going around the pagoda before class and saying hi to Origins outside, so I hope that's okay. Just around the pagoda, and then we'll go in and do a sit together. I don't know if you're new. Anybody who's new, this is a very unusual monument. Well, it's called a stupa or a pagoda or a chorten. There's so many words for this. They used to exist as big earth mounds with cairns on top. And they were used to mark boundaries and important people, all sorts of major historical events. But the Buddha himself authorized only one for two Burmese brothers who were returning home after studying with him and wanted to establish the Dharma there. And he said that anything that they endorsed could only mean world peace or everyone welcomed. He called them himself, apparently, peace pagodas. So we have one. There's only 13 of these, I think, outside Burma. Or Myanmar, I should say. That's a little alcove. That's a little shrine room. We call it the alcove. Just a little shrine room that always accompanies these peace pagodas and stupas. So people can practice here. Okay. This year, out the back here, you can see there's a building site here, a flat place, and here goes a pagoda attendance cabin. So that's a new addition to Origins that will be hopefully opening this year. And then we'll have people devoted to the maintenance of the pagoda and teaching of the traditional Dharma here all the time. It's sort of as a center within a center almost. Okay. We'll go around now. That's what you do with these pagodas. We used to have something much simpler than this bell then. This is a traditional one built by Mon refugees who came here to the center. They're the indigenous people of Southeast Asia. So when you go around a few times, then we ring it. 3 times for peace. Okay. We'll go in now and look at questions and do sits.
Get my boots off. After you, Chim.
Thank you. Come in. I got one arm. I had an operation on my hand, to free up a tendon and Just have to keep it in a sling for a week. So, okay. Okay,
Oh,
thanks,
good.
Melinda. Okay. All right. So welcome to Thursday. We do streaming mindfulness here on Tuesdays with Melinda and Thursdays with myself. And my name's Chimé. And Thursday morning for the first part of the class, some period of time, up to half an hour, is response to questions that people send in. And so it's a good time to remind you, actually, that if you haven't got someone or you want to get our comment on some question to do with practice or how practice might apply to some life situation, then we can share what experience we've got with you too. So that's what we do on the Thursday mornings. And you're very welcome to send one in, and you do it to Melinda. I think you can get her contacts off the Facebook page.
Or even a message on Facebook, on our Facebook page.
Or leave your question on the Facebook page?
In the private message section, yes.
In the private message section of the Facebook page. All right. That's traditional teaching. I don't know if you knew that. But in the long ago, people would meet. The tradition was that you met, and people who were responding from their more experienced practice would not give discourses. Discourses are something relatively new. But, and Sayadaw, the man who built the pagoda, was the same. We're different. We give discourses and give classes. They didn't used to. They would just instruct in the basic tools of mindfulness like we are doing here, and then respond to people's practice questions. And so the teaching is built up, is created out of question. And that was the practice. There was no doctrine. Like there was no list of texts. The Buddha himself resisted that very strongly. It's an interesting bit of history. All right. So this is the first question. And if you do leave a question and want to attach your name, just sign your first name to it. And I'll say so when I get the question. If it has no name attached, then it's a question, a general question that someone has asked. So here it is. You mentioned to help close the divide between us and foster common ground, one can use metta practice, called metta. Could you please speak more on that? How to practice it. So, metta is a foundation teaching of all the teachings. I've never been taught a teaching, a major teaching especially, which didn't feature metta as a foundation. So there's actually 6 words. We use one, metta, but there's actually a number of words to speak about the dimensions of friendship and the growing of goodwill between people. And this ends up, the goal is what's called a bodhisattva society, or what's called a metta society. So it's one that's based on goodwill, mutual tolerance and interest, and a lot of care is taken to build that up and offer opportunities to build it up. There are lots of surveys, lots of studies, anthropological modern studies, which show that when people design institutes which allows them to meet across normal social divides, so in a safe place where there's say a trade, like a union floor, or an inclusive religious body, or some kind of a cultural, some sort of cultural pursuit that people join in. But when people design places and events that are aimed at inclusiveness, then the violence, war, financial imbalance, like material imbalances between people, all the extreme parameters fall. There's been numerous studies on that. Well, people who are doing those studies don't use the word metta. Metta is a Dharma word. So they use words like social cohesion or goodwill or peaceful relations between people. Metta means all that. And it means the development of that. So wherever people say there's a word, as you asked about techniques, that person says, how do you practice it? And there are many ways to practice it. So the most important way is to realize its importance and to foster courtesy and goodwill in your life. Great minds like Meister Eckhart valued that type of courtesy with good intent, not courtesy to schmammy sort of courtesy, not that kind of courtesy, but or flattery courtesy, but courtesy which makes room for friendly dialogue. And he taught that as the only real defense in the time of the Inquisition, which was going on in Europe. He's a wonderful person to read, Meister Eckhart, E-C-K-H-A-R-D-T. If you're that kind of, if you like philosophy, then he's a very, very, very good philosopher to read from the point of view of metta. So one way is to use this word. It's called araham, A-R-A-H-A-M, or H-U-M, araham, araham, araham. It has no meaning, but it means a friendly heart. It's meant to be a word to invoke the feeling of a warm heart. So it means warm heart, or warm heart, cool mind, or something like that. And people who use word can repeat that word to remind themselves, to bring the idea of goodwill, good relations to the forefront of the mind. Because in the busy day it can go down, I can still have that conviction, but it can be shelved back in a special place where I go only when I'm vulnerable or in the company of friends, but the rest of the time I occupy a different network in my mind. And that network doesn't refer to metta. Because we don't just have one self. That's got to be one of the great fantasies. That you've got a bunch of them, and it just depends on what the circumstances are. Now there are some things I suppose you could say are more common to someone, and they go through their various personifications, but we all respond differently in different circumstances. Metta, when it's strong, is there in all circumstances. So when I put it that way, I guess you can repeat why there's so much, you can understand why there's so much respect for it. Anybody, I can't develop metta if I don't know that sometimes I lose it, and under what circumstances I might lose it. It's not a tattoo. It's not a brainwash. It's an attitude that's always updating, because people are always changing. So it's very, very valuable, metta. There are other practices, meditation practices, which you can do with metta, which I won't talk about right now, but in retreat we do them, heart-based. Anything which nurtures here, calm and warm here, where your ribs divide in the pit of the stomach, that's valuable. Because when that's tense or cold, or when there's no awareness there, when that's not responsive, it's difficult for the emotion of goodwill to flow. All right. So it's a huge subject, metta. You can look it up in Pali dictionaries as well. Metta. It means kindness, goodwill, loving kindness. I know when the Dalai Lama and others first started teaching in the West, that's all they talked about. Because without that, then there's no common ground for us to share knowledge on as far as the teaching goes. It depends on that being present. It doesn't depend on scholarship. It doesn't depend on having the data. It depends on open hearts and people with common motivations. So here's another question. Could you speak more, please, on how to approach difficult conversations so as not to create further tension? Oh, now I feel that I can respond to this, as I'm sure you can respond to this. I guess this makes me ask, when I say this, I mean, one of the major teachings about that is to think before you speak, isn't it? And wouldn't it be nice if we all did that all the time? So, but it doesn't happen all the time. So it's a good question because it's something to be nurtured. Conversations can get difficult. People can have very, very different values. So how not to create further tension? Okay. Well, what the different things come to my mind. This is a question which just contemplating the question calmly, just simply holding the question until I can consider it calmly, then that itself is an exercise that can address this. If there's something that's a difficulty, something that's an obstruction, and you know it is, it's easy to see that all around in the world. I mean, it's a really easy thing to see. And I suppose if I'm calm for a minute and look at myself and my own life, I can see I experience that. So I have to, it happens, doesn't it, when I forget that conversations and discussions can bring things up, can become difficult, can stir emotions, can be threatening. So I should be calm with that truth. If I can't, then perhaps I'm really limited in diplomatic value. Because I've been reading Swedish essays lately from some Swedish philosophers of peace are on the ascendant again within their countries, trying to preserve the original impetus that gave rise to Scandinavian form of democracy. And it was a very considered and purposeful form. It wasn't given to people, it was formed out of the population through a year or 2 or 3 years of retreats that they did all across Scandinavia. And they all point out this particular question, that if I have a dialogue with other people around anything which is difficult, around anything which is challenging. What's the topic? Feral animals. How's feral animals? Feral animals will stir anyone. And you get very polarized opinions and feelings very, very quickly. So I can use a difficult subject which I am confused about and which I know disturbs me. So that's step one. I should know what's disturbing to me. I should know the states that I find difficult. I should know when they tend to come up. Then I should remember that and calm those formations. That's what they use the setting up of mindfulness for. But it depends on my being open to my own difficulty. It takes some maturity, I want to say, and I don't mean that in a trivial, silly sense. I mean that in a deep sense. It's very difficult to just simply acknowledge where you fall over, where you're not sure, where you're disturbable. Just simply knowing that and being calm with that knowledge, rather than desperate not to be seen or filled with remorse because it comes up, or guilty or depressed because it's caused difficulty in my life. So there's lots of emotion, lots of situations attached to what I find difficult. I think that's fair comment. Okay, so being calm with that, taking that knowledge to practice, and you do it by just mentioning. It's a form of bare attention. It's where you recall something, but just enough to know it, just enough to feel it, and then you put it away. And so I want to know that I can get disturbed. I want to actually feel that disturbance, and I want to calm it. When I say calm it, I don't mean fix it. I mean calm the reactive state, the reactive sensations and feelings that accompany it, the kind of words that hammer around in the mind and so on, like that. So then I know, then I know in my memory. So when it comes up spontaneously, when it comes up in a conversation, then previous practice can be acknowledged. I just have to be quiet, listen, remember, and the mind will do what it has to do to calm that formation and stop it escalating. So those are the steps that are involved. Often people can't do that. And so that's why there's mediators, people who facilitate discussion. For example, when they do that kind of work traditionally in the Dharma, they always do a sit first. Let's say we're all going to sit around and explore something which is really explosive in terms of opinion and feeling and different kinds of experience we've had. So we all know that. And or it could be a group of people sitting down to discuss their differences. Then people, they have an adjudicator or a facilitator, and they start with, this is the traditional thing. They start with practice. We used to do that at Palmerston, for example, or other areas I've worked which were highly volatile. When you wanted to do something which was challenging that volatility, trying to heal it, you acknowledged the power of it. They didn't fake it. They didn't say, oh, this hasn't got any power, we'll just all be friends. That's kind of naive. So they knew that was powerful. They acknowledged that. And they acknowledged it as human beings and put their mind to work. You have to put your mind to work on the actual dialogue and on the avoiding of opinionated states. That's an art form, as we all know. So traditionally it's approached very methodically, really methodically. Okay. So that's not a complete answer to that, but that's something. And it starts with knowing your own difficulties within your own practice. This is a sacred, special space, this practice that I'm doing. It's a setup, and it's called setting up. And it is a setup. It's in one sense contrived, damsi, they call it. Yeshe pa is when what I'm contriving to understand becomes my own understanding. In other words, the contrivance makes room for real understanding to grow. Okay, so it starts with that. So let's move on then. What does it mean? Mindfulness is always lacking in our world. Mindfulness is always lacking is one of the traditional descriptions of mindfulness, as I try to get a grip in my own mind on what's meant by this word mindfulness. So life is impermanent, always changing and opening. It's interactive, interconnected, dynamic place. It's not possible to wrap it up. It's not static. It isn't amenable to fixation. So there are always new situations coming into being, always new dimensions to be understood. And that insight, that understanding, that purity exists, awakening can exist, purification can exist, like with those difficult questions. If I understand that enlightenment is something dynamic, always trying to come into being, like peace. So there's always new dimensions happening, and that's what's meant mindfulness is always lacking, because it's not my mindfulness. Mindfulness is something that happens in life, and I should learn to recognize and support it. I should learn which aspects of my own behavior are more mindful and which are less mindful. So mindfulness means the capacity or the ability to make peace, to be friendly, to work towards a safer, more just world. In other words, to practice. That's a lifelong, that's a nature of living. That's a sort of the focus or the fulcrum, I guess you could say, of one's life moves to mindfulness. It moves away from opinion, away from fixation on myself, my life, where I'm going, onto the greater good, onto the nature of mindfulness, onto the nature of awakening, and I can participate and practice in that. The teaching says that way the individual life becomes stronger and more independent. So that sounds counterintuitive, but you may have heard, you give yourself away in order to find yourself. You may have heard that. It's through acceptance and surrender, but that's not a blind, eyes shut space. That's acknowledging my own lacks and helplessness and the dynamic nature of the world. And you cannot put peace in a box. You can't adjust the genes so that we'll all be peaceful. Because life's dynamic, people are different. Life thrives on diversity and the invention of diversity, and that's the same with ideas and feelings and individuation in all aspects. For mindfulness to be real, it has to acknowledge what I don't know. In Japan, they say, make haste to unknow. In the great, a wonderful, old, I think it's the only one that's almost told, an old Anglican mystical book is called The Cloud of Unknowing. And that the slant, if you like, the approach to the teaching is through that, through the truth of unknowing. That relates to, in mindfulness, the idea of bare attention, unassuming attention, very interested. It's not in denial, it's not devaluating what's gone before. Which is the real truth, the one I've known or someone I haven't discovered. That's called split mind. And it can't give rise to harmony. Truth grows in truth grows. It's like saying which is the better flower, the yellow one, or they're both flowers, unique flowers. They don't grow to compete with one another in beauty. They actually grow to live and survive, and that demands harmony. That demands a balance and ecology. So these are the. That's what's meant by mindfulness is always lacking. The nature of the real world is always coming into being. So my mindfulness, in order to be mindful, that also has to be there. Like so many have said, it has to do with practice, doesn't it? Because I understand what I'm saying. And I'm thinking that you understand everything of what I'm saying. There's nothing that you don't understand. It's just that understanding has to be linked to culture, linked to action, linked to self-view. And because of that, practice is everything. I mean, that's got to be one of the most common statements in the whole in all of wisdom culture, that practice matters. Okay, all right. So I have to be prepared to discover new ways. But I want to just stress, and then I'll leave it, that it's not a question, if you're seeking truth, seeking understanding, that's not a process of denial. It distresses me that people focus all the time so much on what's wrong, what their difficulties are, what's wrong. There's no room for that difficulty to unravel if I'm not trying to practice. All I can do is box it up and call it myself. This funny bunch of behavior I justify because it's only me. And that is so weak. That won't cut the mustard, it won't go the length. Not under duress. It goes more and more and more and more into narrowness. And strong, independent ego is born of question. And inclusiveness and a daring to kind of face the world a little bit and acknowledge our lacks. So in mindfulness they have this contrivance, and it is a contrivance, but it's a useful one. And they say, try not to label things, you and me, they and them. Try just to stick with difficulty. So I'm having difficulty, I'm getting confused. Then I say, confusion. I have to understand, confusion can happen with me. Buddha said, who cares if it's you or them? What's the matter? It's confusion. Why are you so concerned about whose confusion it is? So we can all, I think, benefit from that. So that's the device. They're not denying. They don't want me to deny. I'm becoming very opinionated and closed off to listening to anyone. I don't want to be a denial. But in order to undo that and open up dialogue, if I focus on my own denial too much, I won't. If I put myself under the thumb, I won't. Very unlikely. And now that has to be understood. I have to move the focus over to the teaching, over to the Dharma itself. Confusion, whether it's mine or yours, and how you live with it, and the truth of the pervasive nature of it, and how to listen and talk together and work our way out of confusion. Okay? Okay. First thing is acceptance, I think. Acknowledgement. All right. That's the responses for today. So obviously I said that on purpose because obviously the same questions could come tomorrow and you can give slightly different slants. Now in the teaching they say, if you've got a question, does it repeat? Any question that repeats in your own mind, you can take to be important teaching. That's an old rule of thumb. I have questions, but the ones that raise themselves repeatedly, I should honor those questions. And the first step of honoring is to say, there's a question I don't know. So I accept not knowing, or that there's knowledge, more knowledge that I would like to have, more experience that I would like to have. That's how they do it in practice. And often, although I think this goes against the grain for many people, I'll tell you anyway, now often they ask the question, that you formulate a question inside. In other words, when my lips acknowledge there is confusion, right? Mm-hmm. Then I empower myself. I'm all confused. I disempower myself. Mm-hmm. So, here is confusion. Okay. I would like any teaching that I can understand, I'm open to that. Now that's a contrived way of putting it, but it's a very useful one, because it gets around the idea that I should understand everything and get my act together. And so many people, I think if I were to say, what's the most current problem that I meet as a teacher, and it's very easy, it's excessive self-evaluation. And often it's excessive self-disvaluation, devaluation, I should say. Okay, all right. All right. Let's do a couple of sits, can we? Make yourself comfortable. So we know that the context of the teaching It's always about enlightenment, and enlightenment means the growth of friendship, the growth of peace, the growth of a thriving, dynamic life that causes much less harm and less division between people. So you can use those words. Collectively they say healing or peace. Those are collective words. But when you go context, sometimes a personal feeling about it comes up. You can express that. So the context of my practice has to do with healing, all the dimensions of healing. In order for practice to have inner compass, I pay respect to that. I acknowledge that. That's like saying I look after the compass, if you want. So I acknowledge that. Respect to the path, followed by myself or followed by others, whatever gives rise to peace in the world. Then you set up the vehicle. That is, you turn your mind to the particular practice that we're doing, that one's doing. This is called the setting up of mindfulness, and it has to do with linking up a calm, attentive, caring type of attitude with the history of experience that is my own body, my living body. And to become familiar with the formations or responses and reactions that are going on there. Okay. So I try to inhabit my own body like I want to inhabit the world. That's a big thing to say, isn't it? So first is setting up the vehicle. This case, posture. The head is upright where it can carry a load. It's balanced on the neck and can move easily in any direction. If you master that, then you can avoid a lot of headache, shoulder tension, common reactive states. The trunk too is upright but not tense, and it can move, sway anywhere. I always recommend to people that they try that. Because that little method, once your mind gets what's going on, the value of it, then it can really help in all sorts of situations. The same for the lower body. It's on its sit bones, balanced and secure. Also with posture, it's able to adjust. So if you want to adjust, there's no resistance. You just simply adjust. Calmly and slowly. The next stage is called calming the bodily formations. And it's where you scan through the body and fill the body with your own awareness. From the crown of the head to the soles of the feet, you pass through. It isn't that you can keep it all. It's just walking through the country that's yours. So it maintains the upright, not tense, resilient posture. Depending on your experience, how deep that is, how thorough. But if you're new to it, make sure you visit the solar plexus, so-called heart center. With your awareness, you touch everywhere inside, the whole body, the feeling there, the sensation. So that's the field of practice. You find tensions, you relax them. You found things have slumped, or then you give them some poise, some alertness. Moving gently is so helpful. So there's the whole body now. You've established that as a field of practice. Then you establish bare attention. It's not looking for anything, but it's awake and has the body in view and just notices. You prioritize the sensations and feelings so that you can see if there's a reaction to some thought or some chronic pain. Okay. Last of all, so the thread of bare attention is there. And you also notice that your breath is free to flow. So the living, breathing body. Or actually they call it living, breathing mind body. "10 minutes now." Okay. last is dedication. It's the end respect, which means respect to the future, and the willing offering, the willingness to practice. So you just offer that. Offering goodwill, all the benefits of practice. Future life. Okay. And you leave your eyes a bit down, and just they come up last, like in Hatha Yoga. The eyes come up last, and you sometimes then in that gap after dedication or even during dedication, so it's after the practice, things can come up and you allow that. Don't indulge them too much, but you acknowledge them. You can allow them. Sometimes longing, or aspiration can come up, and you can express that. All right. So the setting up is a complete practice. And it forms the background, the default practice for others. So you might be doing memory or some creative work that you're working on, and you intersperse it with this. It's used in study that way. I sense myself not absorbing, concentration going down, and so on. So I need to have a break. Now sometimes you have to get up and go for a run. That's different. That's a different thing. That's further. But even before the run, I acknowledge the break, put the pen down, stretch a minute, and just sit quietly for a minute. In the Buddhist order, particularly, this group where they study a lot, and some avenues of that in the big Buddhist countries, then scholarship lies within the order. I'm talking about a place like Tibet. Like that, and they use that to great effect in study. I've noticed it when you get people with that training, refugees who come out and then want to study, like they're studying people, and their teachers are often amazed at how well they can study, because if I can be quiet with my own reactions and memories and aspirations, if I can nurture them in a quiet way, or understand when my passion has gone across a border and has now become something else, not passion for something, but just passion by itself on the loose, then I have to restrain it. If I'm comfortable, generally speaking, not getting on a perfection rave, but if I get comfortable with that, then getting comfortable with some scholarly opinion or a task is relatively easy. So for that reason, for example, people who have had good experience of labor are often easy to teach meditation to. By good experience, I mean they keep their teamwork, keep goodwill, keep the values that they have at the same time as they can work really hard physically with other people, which can be very hard to do. So it's you find that dedicated energy like that. All right, we've got time to do one more sit. Would you join me? Okay. It's a bit unusual for me sitting like this. All right. I won't talk much, and this is the second sit that we do. I won't talk, we'll just do the sit straightforwardly. And this will be a little bit longer. This will be a 15-minute sit. So it's quite important. I don't know if you've had the experience, because nobody's told me, but if you come in practice and due to whatever, but I'm still, I have pain, body pain or discomfort, even though I may or may not see the cause. So it may be because I'm restless, say. So you get conflicted messages in the body, like in repetitive strain injury. You've heard of that? Lots of studies of repetitive strain injury show that that's mostly what the problem is. It's not the actual action of typing. often. It's not the actual action, it's the mind that's involved in the action. And particularly if it doesn't want to do the job, if it feels pressured in the job itself isn't happy, then repetition becomes very damaging. Okay. It's interesting.
Yeah.
It's interesting. The person's relaxed and doing their typing, but it's fine, then they don't get nearly so much. So I may have those insights or I may not. It may be this the way I'm sitting, or I may not see why I'm comfortable. So I don't know if you've had the experience, you still adjust with great care, even though you don't understand, and while you're adjusting and returning, you're watching. That's an important element of practice. Because then you can sit and sit and sit and sit, walk and sit and walk, and go very deeply, very quietly down the pathways of memory. Okay. Okay. This is a 15 minutes. Context is always healing and respect to that. Setting up of posture, then scanning through the body, familiarizing common formations, then whole body bare attention, and lastly the breath, harmony with breath. All right. Okay. of all experience, goodwill, and good intent. Dedicated practice, offer in the life. Okay. Okay then. That's it for another Thursday. I do get feedback from some of you, which is lovely, and so I know that you're out there sometimes watching, and it's really good for practice actually. I find having the virtual world there, because even though you don't see people, they are there, aren't they? Whether it's on a device or in my mind. All right, cheerio. See you soon.